It's great to hear about this example where a company has been able to see the business power of solving a social problem and how that has continually motivated Coca-Cola to look for ways to further extend that impact, to innovate, to find ways to increase the employability of these youth that go through the program because they recognize the business impact that has for the company overall. There's also a really important impact that what Coca-Cola is doing in shared value. There's an important impact that it has on their brand as well. So we're going to transition now to a panel that we're going to have on shared value and brand. And I'd like to call up the panel right now. I'll say a few words as they come up here to introduce the concept. But we're going to have a panel which is led by VanderMolen, who's the vice chairman of Edelman Holdings. And we will have Stephen Kehoe, who's the head of global financial inclusion for Visa. Stanley Litow, who's the VP of Corporate Citizenship and Corporate Affairs for IBM, and Marc Mathieu, who's the Senior Vice President for Marketing at Unilever. Now, as they come up, I just wanted to say a little bit about this concept. We, at FSG, we've been looking at this issue of shared value and brand quite carefully. You see, for Coca-Cola, in Brazil, literally hundreds of thousands of consumers have a different conception of the Coca-Cola brand because of the lives that Coca-Cola is changing in these favelas, as Brian was just telling you about. When we look at this connection between shared value and brand, we see that there are several critical things that distinguish what is an authentic link between shared value and brand and what is merely a powerful marketing campaign. And I wanted to mention those four before I transition to the panel here. First, and this is maybe the most critical, there has to be real social impact there. Has to be real, measurable change that the company can point to. Not just a communication about intent, not just a contribution to an issue, but real measurable social impact. Second, there has to be a dynamic whereby the company, in having that social impact, is creating a deeper emotional connection to its customers or its prospects that are out there. And in order for that connection to occur, the social change, the social impact, needs to be relevant to that consumer or customer. The third thing is that emotional connection that happens between the brand and the company as a result of that social change has to change purchasing behavior. It has to have an impact on purchasing behavior in a way that is measurable. And then finally, that business impact that the company has as a result of the successful shared value and brand program has to be significant enough so that it motivates the company to deepen its efforts, to intensify its efforts, to look for ways to have even more social impact so that then it fuels that virtuous cycle that we were talking about before. Now, this is relevant in many different industries. We've heard about how it's relevant in consumer products. You're going to hear in a few minutes about how it's relevant as well in financial services, in technology, in health insurance, and other areas. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Alan, who's going to say a few words about shared value and brand, and then moderate our great panel. Alan?
Dane, thanks a lot. That introduction was great, and thanks to our hosts, FSG, for driving this initiative aggressively forward and making it actionable for the businesses and related people in the room today. I think I also want to thank the panelists today, Marc, Stephen, and Stanley from IBM, Visa, and Unilever. And I want to focus in a little bit on the use of words, and I'm very happy to hear Dane talk a lot about words. And in particular, I'm going to have us explore some words to make our brands resonate with the stakeholders that are critical to our success to drive shared value. And I picked up on Dane's words of authentic. I also want to talk a little bit about starting to speak in terms of outcomes. and outcomes for people that have relationships with our brands, and impacts, the impacts that our brands through shared value initiatives can have on the lives of employees, consumers, communities, and indeed what they can add to sustainable economic development. We were specifically asked you today to look at how does shared value impact brand value and consumer loyalty. We were also asked to look at how to measure the connection between shared value and brand value. And I want to start with a survey that Accenture did with the UN Global Compact in the autumn, where they surveyed global chief executives and asked them what the barriers were to pursuing sustainable business or sustainable brand strategies. So while 93% of the respondents to that study said they see sustainability as an important factor in business success, they also said only 38% of them believed they could quantify their investments in sustainable business or shared value, and only a third believed that consumers or customers would pay a premium for products and brands that pursued shared value or sustainable business strategies. So a lot of times when I come to events like this, the UN Global Compact or Clinton Global Initiative, or indeed here today, I equate a lot of these to revivals, where old-fashioned revivals in the southern part of the United States, fire and brimstone ministers preaching to the converted. And they usually invite one unwashed soul up who converts on the spot, and everybody celebrates, and then they go home, and it's a big success. I think instead of really talking about the unwashed, I think it's, well, that's kind of rude. I'll get in trouble for that later. Don't tweet that. There's no unwashed here, because we're all using Unilever products. So I'd like us to consider for our discussion today, who else needs to be converted and how to do it. And specifically, I want to talk about that as it relates to consumers and customers. Coca-Cola just talked about employees. I thought that was a terrific segue. How do we get our employees involved and behind it? How do we consistently get executive sponsors like the CEO regional, or this Coca-Cola regional CEO is up here? How do we consistently get executive sponsors behind the investment? And finally, maybe we can touch a little bit on Wall Street and look at the capital markets versus venture capital or ethical investors, how we get them involved in the movement through brands. Then I'd like to discuss a little bit about language again, and not just the what you're doing, or to quote my friend Dov Seidman, the how you're doing it, but maybe we start with the why businesses and brands are pursuing shared value strategies, and what the value is today and the projected value is tomorrow. So with that, I'd like to start with 5 minutes each from our panelists, starting with Marc from Unilever, then on to Stephen from Visa, and then on to Stanley from IBM to talk about their company's experiences, the why they got started, and the results they're seeing so far. So Marc, please.
Okay, well, thank you. And so clearly, I mean, the whole concept that we have been talking about since this morning resonates very strongly with Unilever. I've been with Unilever myself 3 years, spent 12 years before with Coca-Cola, so I had a little bit of knowledge about what Brian was talking about. But when I joined the company 3 years ago, I actually, within the first months, I went to Port Sunlight near Liverpool, where the company actually was founded. Actually, the lever part of the company, Uni, the Dutch side, the margarine side, but Lever, the British side, the guy who gave his name to the company. And I was amazed to see that shared value, as we call it here, actually is really in the DNA of Unilever. The idea that actually a soap is not a soap, but that a soap is actually a way to make cleanliness commonplace. And to bring one of the first brands which William Lever created was a soap called Sunlight. At a time when one of the quotes of Disraeli at that time, Prime Minister then, was to say that Britain was a kingdom of two countries, the rich for whom the sun never set and the poor for whom the sun never rose. And so this idea of sunlight was not sunlight to just the laundry. It was sunlight to the people, to everyone at scale. The next brand that was created was Lifebuoy. Think about it, you know, calling a brand of soap Lifebuoy is probably as weird as calling a brand of computer Apple. You know, it's basically not a classic, it really means what it is, saving lives, you know, by killing germs, etc., so that actually you can fight against what at that time was really a problem, you know, in the UK, you know, of diseases that could kill people, as they still do today in many parts of the world. So this idea that actually you do not need to necessarily, and in many cases we have lots of brands, and we're lucky about that in our portfolio, that you don't need necessarily to just think about selling the product, but you are actually thinking about, you know, what's the purpose that you're pursuing. Michael this morning talked about, you know, shifting corporations from, you know, product-based to purpose-based strategic positioning. And the reality, you know, I often say, you know, we do not market selling soap with Lifebuoy. We actually market hand washing, and it actually gets better than that. We really market saving lives. And part of the programs that we engage in Asia, in Africa, etc., are all about basically fighting against the diseases that are preventable, deaths that are preventable before the age of 5. And that's amazing, and the pride that comes inside the company from doing this, but also with the customers, etc., is amazing. Same, I mean, a brand like Domestos, which is basically a toilet cleaner, is, you know, when I joined Unilever, I thought it's probably the least sexy brand that the company has. You come from Coca-Cola and you get to Domestos. It's really, but the reality is it's a brand that really, you know, has taken on this challenge of the fact that 2.5 billion people don't have access to toilets and to basic, you know, sanitation. And the reality, as Popperman likes to say, you know, the more people have access to toilet, the more Domestos we sell. So actually taking on that purposeful pursuit as a brand makes a lot of sense. We have brands like Flora with the cholesterol reduction products, which I'll tell you, when we do, you know, campaigns, you know, they're not the classical in many cases, at least the ones I like most, the ones that we put on air. They're the ones that actually we organize in a village for 3 weeks, the station somewhere, in a school, in a center, whatever we can find, and we have people come, and we, you know, we tell them how they can change their diet, and we measure their cholesterol, you know, every week for 3 weeks. And when you see the face of these people who say, I'm here because I have grandchildren and I want to live. And they are not saying, I'm here because, you know, I need to consume margarine. So it's really something which I think Paul Polman, personally, the reason why I went to the archive, brought back to the company. And whilst he put this, you know, challenge to reinvent business and the way of doing business with this goal that we put out as a company to double our business, while at the same time reducing our environmental impact and increasing our positive social impact, I took on personally within marketing to reinvent the way marketing gets done. And I often say, you know, in an elevator speech, my job is to make marketing and sustainability two sides of the same coin. So I'll stop here. I'll probably come back and say how we are doing this, how we are working to motivate, you know, on multiple brands, not the ones I talked about, to embed purpose into our brands and use it to actually drive business and behavior change.
Thank you. So, Stephen, now onto Visa, and part of your title includes financial inclusion. So I'm very interested to understand Visa's approach to shared value, and in particular what you mean by financial inclusion and how that impacts your future business.
Yeah, sure. So you know, financial inclusion is one of those great buzzwords within our industry right now, but one of the things I've sort of learned is the moment you step outside of industry, nobody really has much of a clue about what that means. So trying to put that in perspective, first of all, I think is important. Financial inclusion, or rather financial exclusion, is a massive market failure that we've identified all around the world. And our involvement in trying to pursue a strategy of promoting financial inclusion is one which we firmly believe is going to help change and direct the way in which we grow, primarily in emerging markets around the world. In fact, there are many of us within the company who believe that the next billion consumer base for Visa and many of our client banks that we serve is going to come from a strategy which we now associate as being shared value. It has a name now that I didn't know it had, but it's something that we've been taking a hard look at for a few years. So, I mean, begin by sort of addressing the issue with a statement of the obvious. There are a lot of poor people around the world. We know that, and there are a multitude of agencies and governments who are clearly trying to address the fact that people are trapped in poverty. And over the last kind of few years, thanks to great work by microfinance organizations and many other NGOs in the field, financial exclusion has been identified as one of the key reasons why people cannot escape from poverty. They have no way to save effectively for their futures. They have no way to insure their crops or their cattle against disasters that take place. They have no way to buy small pension products or get hold of small amounts of credit to build their businesses. In short, you have people around the world who are striving to move out of poverty and move into the middle class, but they can't do it, and they can't figure out a way of making that lift sustainable. And even worse, they may be subject to some of the most terrible and egregious financial practices that you see that prey on poor people. So this is a market failure. It's a market failure because typically there's a reason why we call these people unbanked, excluded. It's because typically they are too costly to bring into the banking community and provide them with those services. So we took a hard look at this issue, and we're not the only ones. There are a multitude of organizations looking at this. And one of the things Michael Porter said yesterday, when you start to think about a global problem, is go where the money is. So we're quite good at looking at where the money is at Visa. And we found a lot of it. In fact, we found around $14 trillion in cash among the poorest communities around the world between about 2014 and 2024. This is the amount of money which they transact every day in cash, but not particularly securely, it's not convenient, and they're not investing or saving sort of for their future. So the whole premise around financial inclusion and why we believe this is a good business strategy for us is if we can find ways in which we can bring these people into the financial mainstream at a cost that works for them, but at the same time keeps the whole value chain engaged and interested. In other words, we find a sustainable business solution to a market failure, then we believe we're on track to really doing something that's going to be meaningful, not just for the future growth of our company and the clients we serve, but also for these many hundreds of millions, in fact 2.5 billion people around the world who not only don't have a toilet, but they don't have a bank account either. So this is the way in which we think about financial inclusion. And so my job really within the company is to take a hard look at this and ask questions about how can this become part of our mainstream core business, because that's really where it needs to be baked. So we need to look at economic models, we have to look at pricing, we have to look at products. Jing-Yong Kai from the IFC this morning mentioned technology. Technology is the massive facilitator of this. You all know it. It's the mobile phone, which enables us to drive down transaction costs and provide products at a more reasonable way. So you pull all that together, that essentially is the shared value initiative within Visa that I'm focused on.
That's terrific. Thank you. Stanley, now IBM is certainly a pioneer in understanding shared value and looking at it from a brand and a business perspective. So I'm interested in you sharing a little bit of your journey with this, as well as I think you're one of the few people that I've seen who is sponsored by both the business and is responsible for the foundation. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the relationship between the foundation and the business as well.
Sure. Well, let me start off with the fact that this is about going beyond shared value into real value. Because if you're sharing something that's not valuable, it's not really going to affect the bottom line. You're not going to get support for it. So the challenge really is not to do something separate from the business, but to embed directly into the business an approach towards citizenship that produces real significant value. Now, we're a business-to-business company, and our core element of the company is around innovation and transformation. We invest about $6 billion a year in IBM research laboratories around the world, and all of the work that's done in those labs is directly embedded in our citizenship program. That's how we incubate the ideas that we bring into the mainstream, into the community. Second, from the standpoint of transformation, that's all about your ability to recruit and retain top talent. And embedded in every one of the programs that we operate are efforts to improve the skill and the talent of our top and most gifted employees, and also to make sure that by embedding them in our citizenship programs, we increase their skills and we also improve the retention of top talent. And I'll give you a couple of examples of how that is embedded. When we created the IBM Corporate Service Corps, where we select 500 of our top talent each year and send them out in teams to do innovative projects in growth markets, we were able to open growth markets for the company, places where we didn't have business, but by putting our top talent on the ground to create real value by creating the management structure for a healthcare program or a program to train and empower entrepreneurs. The work that they did got so much attention for IBM that it led to the development of markets for us in those geographies. It also built the skills and talent of our most gifted employees so that their skill levels increased, our retention rates of the talent increased, and the ability for them to be able to influence government leaders and people from other corporations increased, so it added significant amount of value. The second important thing through our citizenship efforts is to actually create intellectual capital that the company can use and embed in products and services. So when we invented a new way to teach children how to read using voice recognition technology, that's something that's been very successful in building literacy rates around the world. But it also created new patents and new intellectual capital that we were able to embed in individual products, and it had a specific and significant business return for the company. And also in areas where you are looking to improve your brand as a business-to-business company, we're trying to demonstrate through our citizenship efforts that we can add value to our clients. So for example, we created something called the Supplier Connection, a way for small businesses to become a supplier for 25 large companies easily on the web, one certification so that they can enter the supply chains, grow their businesses. We created this program, and now there are 25 large companies that are part of it. The small businesses that have gotten supply chain contracts in the U.S., that's $1.5 billion worth of contracts that small businesses got. And the research evidence indicates that if you get a large business contract for a small business within 2 years, you double your workforce and you increase your revenue by 200%. So that created value in business growth, but it also created value in demonstrating to many of our clients how we can help them improve their supply chain process, productivity, and it results in ultimate business opportunity for the company. So our citizenship efforts, number one, improve the training, the talent, and the capacity of our workforce. Number two, it opens up new markets, especially in growth markets where we need to grow and enter those markets through our citizenship program. We create intellectual capital, whether it's patents or new products and new services that emanate from the programs that we've operated. We created a virtual supercomputer to aid cancer and AIDS research, and we're able to use that intellectual capital commercially. And finally, we get many of the socially responsible investment funds to increase year to year their investment in IBM based upon our social responsibility. And finally, all of these efforts are so linked to how we do business as a company that the media attention that we get for the work that we do, which, by the way, is more than any product or service that the company sells, it is the #1 media story for the company, that also has a significant value. So I think it's not shared value, it's real value. It's not separate from business strategy, it's embedded in business strategy. And that's how you sustain it year to year, decade to decade. I've had an opportunity to work now for 3 CEOs for the company, and I guarantee you that the economic future of the company waxes and wanes. You have to participate in growth cycles, and you have to be able to go through difficult periods. But if you are not producing real return and not producing real value, it's not something that's going to be sustainable.
Thank you. I want to follow up now with a question about adding new customers or consumers to a brand franchise. In balancing the product functional attribute against the brand promise or brand value from a shared value point of view. And maybe we can start with Unilever, because I love the growth market percentage of your business and how you're making your brands relevant to the growth markets. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about balancing functional attribute against brand.
Yes, so again, back to this point about moving corporate missions or brand missions from product to purpose-led strategic positioning. The reality, it's not moving it from to, it's moving it to embed both. And the reality, you need to continue to have a product truth that is at the root of what you're actually offering to consumer. But then you need to anchor your purpose into a human truth, something that people care about, as you talked about in your introduction. And so one of the things which we did over the last 3 years is, and that was no small feat in a company with so many brands and so many people across the globe, we actually rethought the positioning statement framework of Unilever. And what we did, we had what we used to call the brand key, and we rebranded it the brand love key. You heard Brian talk about brand love being the measure of Coca-Cola. I think I probably get a little bit of the credit for that move at Coca-Cola 10 years ago. So shamelessly, I borrowed the terminology, so now we call it brand love key inside Unilever. But what we did, more importantly than rebranding it, we actually worked at the core on putting purpose into the brand positioning statement, and also putting the connection to the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan ambition of the brand inside the brand key, and that's the love. So that's the one we designed, the new brand love key, in the shape where there is a heart at the top of the brand love key. And in the heart is not the product, is not the purpose, but it's the sustainable living ambition of that specific brand. And so it really forces us to think through on each of the brands, how do they connect to our sustainable living plan, whether it is on the health and well-being focus of the plan, whether it's on the environmental focus on the plan, whether it's on the sustainable farming, agriculture, sustainable livelihood of the plan, or a combination of the above. And it creates very, very interesting and sometimes very interesting and dense debates, because it's not straightforward. A brand like Dove was not born with a purpose. It was not born with self-esteem. It was born with a wonderful product, with a great recipe. But the reality, the purpose, is something that the brand found, along the way. And now it seems obvious to everyone when we do a campaign for real beauty, or we talk about, women being more beautiful than they think they are, and turning beauty from a source of anxiety to a source of confidence. All of this seems obvious to a brand like Dove, but it was not there at the beginning. So it's really taking that journey on and making it part of what drives, consumer people. And I always say, consumers are people, and that's one of the moves we've done is really rethink about marketing as a human pursuit. It's about the people we serve, and it's about the people we are, and it's about bringing back that humanity. So it's not just bringing back purpose, but it's also bringing back humanity to marketing and to business. One last thought I will say about purpose. When you go back to the origin of corporations, incorporation was actually something which was not granted to just about anybody. Back when the concept of incorporation started, you actually needed to demonstrate in your chartered purpose, which you needed to have a chartered purpose attached to your incorporation request. And you actually needed to demonstrate the benefit that you were having to the community. All the things that we actually talk about here today as if they were new. The reality, they are not. We just forgot them or kind of put them on the side over the last few decades because they were not convenient.
Right. Good. Stephen, could you just carry on for me a little bit about the notion of customer acquisition, customer retention, and how you express the brand in a way that brings more people to your franchise?
Yeah, so, our sort of mission statement at Visa really for many, many years has been very simple. It's to be the best way to pay and be paid, right? So that speaks to the notion that if you have a Visa card or you're paying online, you have a Visa account, we want that transaction to be safe, secure, and to work every single time, right? In other words, it is your choice to either be paid or to make a payment. And for a long time, that has driven the way in which we've thought about investing behind new technologies and new channels to be able to work with our clients and merchants to connect everybody together. And about 2 years ago, we added 3 words to that mission statement. Now it's to be the best way to pay and be paid for everyone, everywhere. And the addition of those 3 words fundamentally shifted the way in which we think about our customer base. Because suddenly that opened up the notion that Visa could no longer be a company which was primarily directed towards the more affluent groups in society, all of whom have a credit history, you have a card or a debit card, you have a bank account, and use these transactions. Suddenly we've got to think about the people at the bottom of the pyramid, those people that live on $1, $3, $5 a day. If we're going to be true to our mission statement, we actually have to think about those groups as well. So now you think about how that fundamentally changes the way in which we as a company must think about strategy. Because suddenly the models, the products, our relationships have to change very differently. The way in which we sell and brand, not only to the consumers, but also to our primary clients. We're a B2B company as well. At the end of the day, our banks are the customers out there, has to very much shift. And that has been, I guess to Marc's point that he made a little bit earlier, an incredibly difficult thing to drive within a company. So the biggest single challenge really that I have as I think about leading this global strategy is in talking to executive management about the fact that if we think about KPIs and return on investment in the way in which we have always thought about it, we're not going to actually invest it the way we need to reach people who are at the bottom. In other words, we have to come up with a different set of performance measures which are going to drive us. And those performance measures are going to have to be accepted within the company throughout. So for me, this introduced this idea of social impact as being a legitimate and justified way of thinking about measuring progress. And I can talk more about that if it's of interest. But that's a way in which we sought to, number one, have the internal conversation about this, and number two, go externally and talk to a range of different stakeholders, including our clients, about how, as an organization, we believe that investing behind and thinking about social impact will actually end up in having a long-term financial result for the company.
Great. Stanley, talk to me a little bit about the importance of your brand competitively when you're in a tender against one of your competitors. Help me understand about how you leverage shared value as part of your competitive process.
Well, let me give you an example. IBM started the Smarter Planet campaign, right? The idea was that through transformational technologies like cloud and big data and social and mobile, you're going to be able to help build a smarter planet. And then you had to find examples of how you could do that. To be able to lead the business in that way, we created something called the Smarter Cities Challenge, an open competition where we selected 100 cities over a 3-year period. Cities had to identify a critical challenge that they had. It could be transportation, it could be economic growth, it could be healthcare, it could be social services, it could be education. And if they were selected, we would send them a team of our 6 top talent to move into your city, live there, work with your team, develop a solution that would be transformative around a problem. So that at the end of a 3-year period, we have sent 600 of our top talent into 100 cities and created innovative ways that improve transportation services, created ways to impact on economic growth by building new businesses, whether it's urban agriculture in Milwaukee or addressing things like public safety, a public safety plan in the city of Johannesburg or St. Louis, to be able to show real impact in being able to impact on crime rates. At the end of that period of time, the end product is to be able to demonstrate what really is Smarter Planet and why is IBM more skilled and gifted than our competitors in being able to do that. The byproduct of that is creating a skill base within the company that really has had an experience that few others have had. It's not like a business trip. It's joined in a team with people in a city solving your problems, creating a real understanding about the IBM brand by people who have experienced it. And then ultimately, if it turned out we wound up getting $100 million worth of business out of cities, that's a byproduct that goes into the bottom line. But the real effort is to really explain what really is a smarter planet and how does big data and cloud and social and all the tools that are embedded in the solutions that we developed, how does that make it a smarter planet? How does that improve the quality of government service? Now, government is not only serving government. Government is critical because it has client partners in telco or in healthcare that are our private sector clients. So by being able to do this, we also built our brand, built our relationships with key clients of the company, and also open markets, again, in places where we had no brand and we had no impact, that we had a small number of people on the ground. But at the end of the Smarter Cities Challenge engagements, we were able to actually identify the opportunity that could grow and build those markets. So that's an example of how the citizenship program actually leads the business, builds the brand, builds the value, and sustains itself over time. So now as we're thinking about a new type of technology, cognitive computing, the Watson technology that won Jeopardy, the idea of a thinking computer, we will begin the process of entering those commercial markets through efforts through citizenship. So we're partnering with Memorial Sloan Kettering to use that thinking computer to actually create an oncologist that could diagnose cancer based upon 40 years worth of data drawn from Sloan Kettering's databases, to be able to convert it into natural language and essentially lead not only the business but all of our business clients in understanding how significant the Watson thinking computer, cognitive computing, can embed itself in solving social problems and then ultimately, by example, solving business problems. So I think if you're going to think about your citizenship programs in an effective way, it's totally embedded in your business strategy. It's not waiting for the spare change approach. Rosabeth Cantor at the Harvard Business School wrote an article about the IBM approach, and she called it going from spare change to real change. The spare change is you made some money through your business, and then you've got some excess that you can use in the way of building shared value or citizenship programs. And that's interesting if your goal is demonstrating generosity. But if your goal is implementing change and producing real change, then it's not the thing that's least valuable to you, your spare change. It's what your company is. And from our standpoint, the idea of building value around creating economic return for the company, whether it's through building smarter cities and a smarter planet, or building innovation through cloud or social or mobile technologies, and being able to demonstrate actually how it solves a societal or social problem, and then by example being able to give your sales and marketing people the opportunity to convert that into actual commercial value, because it tells your clients if you could do something as significant as creating a cloud initiative that drove relief and recovery in the Philippines, it's certainly something that you might want to look at in terms of your commercial opportunity.
Mark, before I get to a next question, you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to take a second to acknowledge one thing about what Stanley just talked about, which is smarter planet and smarter cities is in reality really smart. What I mean by that is if you said, and it's a challenge we have, we talk about sustainability, we talk about shared value, but it's a challenge we have, is if you had made sustainable planet and sustainable cities, it's not sexy. It's not sexy. And by calling it smarter planet, the same way that there's this whole movement about collaborative consumption. But if I told you, you're going to now share your cars with somebody else when you don't need it, or you're going to share your home with somebody else when you don't need it, somebody you don't know, by the way, and who may rip off your car, who may rip off your home, who may leave. You're going to say, no, I don't want to do that. But if suddenly I talk to you about Zipcar, I talk to you about Airbnb, and suddenly you realize that it's the smart way, it's to actually find something in it for you, but also to actually live in a different way. Suddenly you've created a consumer-led movement, as opposed to trying to tell people behave more sustainably. Bill McDonough always said, if you ask someone, how is your relationship with your wife, and you answer, well, it's sustainable, it's not really sexy. So, shared is probably not a good word either. So, so the reality is we really need to find a vocabulary to encourage, to embrace, to make consumers want to actually participate, which is much more compelling to them. We embarked at Unilever on a program on the corporate brand, and we actually call it Unilever Project Sunlight. And we're about to launch what we call the Sunlight Living Challenge, which again is all about sustainability. It's all about embedding new behaviors in families' ways of living every day, and showing to people that it's actually easier than it seems. But doing it in a way which borrows from the smarter cities, or what William Lever saw 125 years ago, calling a soap Sunlight, as opposed to, calling a soap, wash yourself dirty, stupid.
Speaking of wives, that's what my wife often tells me. I'd just like to point out a cultural nuance here, too. If I would have made that wife sustainable sharing joke with the American accent, I'd have been dead. But the European accent, it pulls it off. I want one question, 1 minute each, and then we're going to open it up for you all to ask questions. In convincing three stakeholders of the importance and the brand value of a shared value-driven brand, who's the most difficult stakeholder group for you to convince in your businesses? Is it executive leadership? Is it capital markets? Or is it your consumers? Let's start with Stanley.
Well, I actually think that there's a challenge involved in all three, but I don't see them as being an insurmountable challenge. Again, I mean, we produce each year, I present to the IBM board, and I demonstrate an ROI on our investment in our citizenship programs. we produce a 3-to-1 return in the measurable areas that we talked about: recruitment and retention of talent, the creation of intellectual capital for the company, growth in terms of socially responsible investment, and free media opportunities that demonstrate the quality of the brand. So if our investment is around $200 million a year, our return on investment is around $600 million a year. That's helpful in persuading the IBM board to continue to support this at the level that they support it. It sustained us in terms of the three CEOs that I've worked with in my tenure at IBM. It's helped us in terms of understanding how we can add value to our clients, because that's one of the things that we try to do. If your experience is to, you want to pick the cheapest competitor, and you might be able to work with others. If you work with IBM, you also have the opportunity to gain insight into your citizenship programs. So I think it helps us with clients. In terms of our employees, if you looked at our HR data about recruitment in terms of finding the top talent, number one issue in terms of recruiting people is money. Number two is the location of where they're assigned. And number three is the IBM Citizenship Program and its ability to attract people to work for the company and understand that the issues that they care about will be sustained. So I think all of those audiences are persuadable, but they're really persuadable based upon data. If you've got the data, then you've got the opportunity to build support through all those three avenues that you would like to get in terms of gaining support.
Okay. Stephen, which one?
It's a tough question to answer. I think the toughest challenge I would say is country management. And let me explain why I say that. I talked about how we measure social impact. We initially took a look at social impact and said, and we measured it through access. The more people that have access to some kind of Visa account that enables them to connect to a bank or a regulated financial institution to enable them to do, that's going to drive transaction traffic. But actually, it's not just access. It's actually usage as well. It's the number of times they then use that to sort of do that. And I fundamentally believe that if we can drive access and usage, it's going to drive long-term business value because of the volume, because of the number of people out there, both to us and to our client banks. But the long-term sustainable strategic development of this strategy comes ultimately from the willingness of the country management teams to invest behind doing this. I'll always have a pot of money that I can allocate to do some good things and seed money to get it off the ground. But ultimately, I've got to be able to look the country manager in the eye and say, you need to think about diverting this amount of money from your P&L this year in order to be able to make that happen. And they have to make that case to then senior executives every year to do that. And the senior executives then have to recognize that social impact measures are a legitimate way for them to be able to make the case. So that is the toughest call, I would say, right now, among a whole bunch of stakeholders who are also very difficult.
Mark?
So at Unilever, we're lucky because we have a CEO that actually really has, taken this as his platform, and his platform not just internally but also externally, and therefore we really don't have much difficulty on that front. The employees, therefore, there are differences, but I mean, whether it's in countries, in categories, in brands, I mean, all of that works out pretty well. Two things. First, so clearly, what I talked about before, the consumer, that's where our biggest focus on, because we can do as much as we want to reduce the quantity of water we use to manufacture our detergents. Where the water is used is actually in the washing of the T-shirt, multiple times. And so, keeping that focus on how we think about the impact of packaging, but also of usage of resources is critical. One of the difficult audience to convince is probably, I would say, everybody in this room. How many people in the room stand up is younger than 25-year-old? And the reality, you know, so the reality, and it was touched upon this morning, you know, we often say, you know, in many places in the world, you know, youth is more than 50% of the population of the planet today, and it's, you know, 100% of its future. And a lot of the thinking we are putting is in thinking about how can we actually empower youth and make sure that we actually let a little bit go of our prejudice that, you need to be wise, because we've not demonstrated that much over the last few decades, that you need to be wise to fix the issue. And in reality, recognize that youth has a different culture in which many people were born. You know, climate change is their daily news as opposed to, something which we're still, thinking is going to go away. It's not going to go away for them. It's always been there. But also have a different, relationship with technology, therefore with collaboration, with solving problems. And so therefore really thinking about the ways we all can support, youth and get beyond the prejudice that we need to solve this rather than actually helping them, solve it, which is not about, giving up and saying it's not our problem, it's your problem, good luck. But it's really recognizing that there are many, many young entrepreneurs in the world, externally to corporations, but also in corporations, also in governments, etc., who are actually working in a very entrepreneurial way and with lots of energy and, decades to live on finding solutions and reinventing business model.
Thank you. Do we have time, our host, do we have time for questions from the floor? Yes. Thank you. Can we have questions, please? There are 3 microphones. Please. Go ahead.
Hi. I'm not sure it's on. Got a question for Stephen, particularly, but before, my name is Marlene New. I work for Heifer International. We're a NGO working in rural development. Stephen, I wanted to let you know something first. Real interested. I was working in Africa in a real remote area with farmers that were bringing dairy into a chilling plant. And I was talking to one of the farmers and putting them on video. And they were working where they could actually get the payment of what they brought the dairy on a Visa card. And he held up his card and said, "Visa, it's everywhere you want to be." In very, very broken English. And I thought it was very interesting because it's talk about brand. But I wanted to ask you, you mentioned the challenge of getting into the employees, the toughness of the shared value and that feeling into your employee base. And I'm curious, not just for you, but for the others, how many of you have KPIs, measurements relating to social impact that relate to performance bonuses?
I'll take a crack at it first. We do a lot of research on the people who are involved directly in our citizenship programs. We have about 250,000 of our employees who regularly do community service, and we have about 7,500 a year that are embedded in all the projects that we do. And then we ask them, to what degree did this improve your capability to do your day job? 9 out of 10 said it significantly improved their ability to do their day job. We also calibrate, to what degree did it help you with your listening skills, your teaming skills, your cultural adaptability skills, and again, 9 out of 10 say substantial increase. And then we look at how many of the people who are involved in those programs are your top talent retained by the company as opposed to the overall population of top talent who leave. And overall, the people that we're most interested in retaining, people ages 30 to 40, with 5 to 7 years within the company, we lose about 10 to 12% of those, versus losing less than 0.5% of people who've been involved in those kinds of programs. So in terms of looking at the return on investment, we have some very, very specific ways of examining the degree to which it helps you build skills and retain top talent.
So we don't. yet. I talked about this being a journey, right? It's one of the biggest challenges within the company, I think probably within any company, is to sort of recognize some of this. But you know, I certainly see it sort of personally as one of the key goals that I have as a leader in this area is to get the KPIs around social impact recognized as some form of performance measure. I actually believe unless we actually succeed in doing that, it's going to be very tough in order to be able to track the kind of investment and initiatives in there. So you've spoken to something which is, you know, in the top 2, 3 things that I have on my agenda of things to move within certainly my organization.
So I think, again, I mean, and we just published in April our annual report on our Unilever Sustainable Living Plan commitments. So really this idea of KPIs, both on the environmental and the social front, is very much front and center to the way we think internally and externally. One of our, you know, challenges is always to you know, to keep ahead of the curve. And one of the things that we always try to do is to remind ourselves of our own commitment to, you know, our journey, but also given how public we've become on this front, to actually recognize that, you know, even if Unilever succeeds and other companies fail, you know, collectively we will have failed. So one of the things which is one of the reasons why I'm here, and I guess you're here too, is because we all need to actually drive that journey collectively, because, you know, there is no place to hide. There is not, you know, we succeed and others fail. Either we all succeed or we all fail collectively. And that's, to me, what shared means.
Next question, please.
Good segue. You actually talked about working together. I work for Glacier Media Group, and we're a media company, and basically a collection of media companies in Canada, over 100 business and trade publications and newspapers. And we really believe that we have a role not only on the awareness side of things, but also just because we're connected to the business to really bring together the communities and the different clusters and the development side of things. I'd be curious to know what each of you think in terms of how our role can be as connectors, and maybe specific to your business, or just generally what we can do to act as facilitators for that collaborative effort.
I'm happy to start. So recently we actually, with the Unilever brand, we actually did a partnership with Upworthy. And the reason we connected with Upworthy is because fundamentally we live in a world of bad news. You know, we are genetically programmed to actually react more to bad news than good news. Because guess what? You know, when we were animals, you know, good news was fine. Bad news, you know, a predator coming to eat you, you need to react immediately. So we are genetically programmed to react more, to be more suspicious, more immediate, you know, to have a reaction 10 times more strong on bad news than good news. Therefore, we're more likely to buy news 10 times more on bad news than on good news. And that's one of the things which I think collectively, again, we need to change, is we need to start to show possibilities as opposed to only show problems just because it sells better. And I think that what we like at Upworthy is that they curate, worthy news, worthy of sharing, which are not necessarily about woman dies, but that are about basically possibilities and again examples of people who actually are trying their best, here and there, to actually change the model. So I think that's my message also to you is, help us fight against that nature we all have to react more, to bad news or risks than good news.
I think in terms of like traditional media and new media, I mean, obviously we need collaboration, we need to work together, but we need to work together about a story that people want to hear about. So you can't sell something that doesn't make any sense. your collaboration and partnership has to be around content that really speaks to everyone's needs. When we created the new P-TECH program, a new model for high school in America, President Obama talked about it in the State of the Union address. President Obama visited the school, and as a consequence of the amount of attention it got from the State of the Union addresses and the president's visiting to the school, there were about 2,000 media stories about that initiative. And we were able to support that through social media, through a variety of other elements, which made it into a very, very significant and large story that's now growing around the U.S. and globally. But without the content, it wouldn't go anywhere. So I think you start off with the content. Why is this a story that people would want to know about? Why is this a narrative that's exciting or innovative or important? And then the strategies can flow from that. But if you're trying to create the media story around something that is, something that everybody doesn't care about or everybody does, it's not creative or innovative enough to be able to get that kind of attention for anyone.
And for our last two questions, maybe you can direct it at one of the three panelists so we can get both your questions in. Is that fair?
Great. My name is Shari Berenbach, and I'm the president of the U.S. African Development Foundation. What has been most striking to me about this conversation has been really how we have three really exemplary corporations. And each of you are talking about how your companies have embraced shared value as if it was the most normal, natural kind of business practice that you could imagine. And you've also talked about how getting to where you are today was a journey. And so I don't know which of the three of you might want to respond. If there can be some sort of insights for others in the room about what were the key turning points or the aha moments, or how did your corporation get from the models that we've talked about before, the corporate social responsibility or whatever, to this shared value model, because it is quite striking and very impressive. So thank you.
Let me ask.
Do you want to hear both questions and then?
No, just go ahead.
I'm just kind of real quick on that, because actually yesterday when there was a smaller group of this audience, I think meeting with FSG and the others, I was introduced to a framework that we were asked to sort of discuss, which sort of took you on a life cycle from early stages all the way through to sort of shared value. And one of the first things that was sort of on this model was this one of I'm going to forget. I think it's called like sensing the opportunity, in terms of trying to identify what it is that you're trying to sort of go after. Again, little did I know what the label was, but I think that was what started off as being something which was a kind of a nice-to-do thing. And the reason we knew it was a nice-to-do thing was because we were approached by organizations that asked us for funding to help us do this, promote financial inclusion better in more informed ways around the world. But then I suppose what we went through is this identification that here is a really big business opportunity if we can get it right. And so I think it was the trigger was in this realization that there is first of all, a connection between a major public policy issue around the world and long-term profitability. And then secondly, I guess in our case, a recognition that technology has significantly advanced in a way which enables that to make happen. I mean, our fundamental belief now is, thanks to the mobile phone and associated technology, there is no reason why anybody in the world today should not have access to safe and secure financial services. No reason. It exists. The technology exists. We've just got to get the model right.
Can we do one last question? Is that right? The last question, please.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Kehoe from PSI. We're an international NGO and very happy partner to Unilever and many of you in the room. It's telling to me that we have a product company. I'm not getting into your missions. A product company, a money company, and a technology company sitting together on the panel. The 4.5 billion that we talk about generally don't have access to these products, to money, to technology. Have you guys ever thought about working together on this to really create shared value, to think about it in a more cost-effective way, to sell into your shareholders, your CEOs? And if you haven't, are you going to after this panel? Are there others in the room? he could potentially join that conversation, because I think that's when we'll really start to see big change, is when business starts working together and collaborates rather than competes.
Well, I'll just say from my standpoint, engaging our clients in our activities is a critical strategy for us going forward. The idea of creating the new model for high school, we've got about 65 other companies that are collaborating and partnering in that effort. You know, the Corporate Service Corps and the Smarter Cities Challenge, we embed our clients in our teams when we send them around the world, and it provides an opportunity for them to see firsthand exactly how that collaboration works. So I think collaboration with our private sector partners is a critical component of the strategy. But collaboration on the public sector and the voluntary sector is equally important. I heard earlier there was a question about why doesn't government get it? There isn't any one of the programs or efforts that we've talked about, whether it's financial inclusion or job growth or health care or making cities smarter or making the planet smarter, that the private sector, even if we collaborate, is going to be effective unless we work closely with government and civil society. And the question earlier about why doesn't government get it, part of the reason why government doesn't get it, or sometimes the private sector doesn't get it, or sometimes civil society doesn't get it, is because they live in a silo about talking to people who are only in their sector of the economy, and that there aren't a lot of collaborative ways where we engage in that joint problem solving before we get into actually operational activities. And if you wanted to know why government could get it better, it could get it better if it had more opportunities to work collaboratively to understand what skills and talents exist cross-sector. And that's the critical problem. I came into the private sector from a career in government service. I was deputy chancellor of schools, I worked for the mayor, I worked for the governor, I ran a think tank. My experience is cross-sector, and my experience has always been that people look at their sector as the solution provider and everybody else is the barrier. And the reality is that everybody can be the barrier or everybody else could be the solution provider. And if we could break down the silos cross-sector, I think we'd have a lot more success in solving the kind of problems we're looking to solve.
Guys, that'll wrap us. I'd like to thank Marc from Unilever, Stephen from Visa, and Stanley from IBM, and again, our hosts from FSG.
Great. Well, thank you very much for an exciting morning. Thank you to the four of you for this enlightening conversation. I always enjoy this day so much because I get to sit back and listen and hear the insights. And I just realized, you know, the Shared Value Initiative doesn't have a tagline, and it just came to me in this last session. The Shared Value Initiative, we're normal and we're natural. So there you got it. I'm also right now genetically programmed to deliver good news, which is that we have an hour for lunch, and we look forward to seeing you back at 1:45. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.